for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Hey, Long Island, this is former Suffolk County Executive Steve Levy. Welcome to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy on this beautiful weekend. It's teasing us a little for spring, but don't get your hopes up. We'll go back to that nasty weather soon, I'm sure. But we have an action-packed show for you today. We want you to join in. This is your radio station. It's a live call-in show for Long Island residents. Listen, you can tune in to some of these national guys, and they're entertaining. You learn a lot from them, but you're not going to get through. It's really, really hard. But here on Speak Out Long Island, you can get through to talk about issues that are of concern to you, not just these global issues, which we do talk about, but we like to talk about state issues, local Long Island issues, and so much more. If you want to chime in, we're here from 2 to 4 live. It's 631-451-1039. We're going to hear what you have to say on various issues. And we're going to touch base today on a number of things, from the potential Long Island Railroad strike to this outrageous contract for Suffolk County detectives, to our LIPA bills continuing to climb, to this new plan to give college courses to individuals in prison, and the so-called end to austerity from the president. I bet you and I will agree, we didn't even know we ever were in austerity on a national level, where they've run up a $17 trillion debt. But these are the topics we're going to talk about and a whole lot more. In our second segment, we're going to be joined by Fred Gorman, who is one of the leaders of a group called LIFER, L-I-F-E-R, Long Islanders for Educational Reform. These guys were in the forefront of fighting for Long Island taxpayers to get a better break and for our students to get a better education. So Fred is a wealth of knowledge on these school issues, and he'll be joining us around a 2:30 time period. But let's get into a couple of issues that, if you're not ticked off to the gills at this point, if these two issues don't put you over the edge, I don't know what will. If you're wondering why it is so incredibly difficult to afford to live here on this island, just look at these two things that came about this week. More on the negotiations regarding the Long Island Railroad and the MTA employees with their management. And secondly, this detective's contract in Suffolk County that will give us a $227,000 detective in the year 2018. Unbelievable, outrageous, but you know, where is the outrage? Where are the people rushing into Hauppauge with the pitchfork saying, we've had enough? And you know, it's very easy to blame the members themselves. They're not to blame. Hey, if you're a detective, or if you're a police officer, or if you're a railroad worker, it's not your fault. You're sitting there saying, hey, my union negotiated these benefits. I have a legal right to them. Why should I say no? And they're absolutely right. They're not the problem. Even the union management, which I think can be very thuggish at times. I've dealt with some of these municipal unions on a local level. They're tough. They're not bending. They want more and more and more. But you know what? You can say that's their job, okay, to try to get as much as they can for their members, even though I think sometimes they're short-sighted and foolish in that one day they're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, as you saw in Detroit, where now they're giving back their pensions. But they're not really to blame either. Who's to blame? It's the elected officials who have rolled over, and instead of being there as advocates for taxpayers, they have become the advocates for the municipal unions in order to do their bidding so that they can get their endorsements and have the least path of resistance on their path for a re-election. And what better evidence of that than this week, 12 elected officials, high-ranking elected officials from Long Island and a metropolitan area, mostly on the federal level, but some state officials as well, write a letter to MTA management basically saying, roll over and play dead and allow for these union demands to go through unabated. Now remember, this is the same Long Island Railroad Union, the same union in the MTA, that has one of the most outlandish contracts in the universe. This is the same Long Island Railroad and MTA that allowed for 98% of their membership to retire and then put in a claim for disability after they retired and wound up getting a retroactive disability pension on top of their regular pension. We all know the fraud that was inherent in that system, that was perpetrated by this cottage industry with the lawyers and the union heads directing them to these crummy quack doctors. A lot of people got in big trouble for this. Many of them had to plead guilty and give back their bogus pensions that they got. But the taxpayers and the ratepayers were raped by this system. And now you finally have an MTA board that is trying to fight for ratepayers, the folks who use the railroad every day, let's say the customers of the railroad. They're trying to fight for taxpayers so we don't have to keep subsidizing this nonsense. So they're saying, no, we're not giving any raises. We want 3 years of zeros. And by the way, we want concessions because we want to change these crazy work rules. These rules that say if you work on a diesel train the same day you work on an electric train, you get double time. Absolutely ridiculous. The same rules that say you can get overtime for washing your hands or changing your clothes. The same union that has given us these work rules where the state controller has come in and said they have to change. We now have 7,500 employees within this agency, the MTA, who make over $100,000 a year. And that's why several years ago, when they were at a crisis situation, and the governor came in and said, we have to fix this, then Governor David Patterson, and the elected officials on the state level, they didn't say we have a spending problem, oh no, which would have been the right thing to do. They said we have a revenue problem. We've got to close $1 billion hole. So how are we going to do that, they asked. By changing these crazy work rules? No, they didn't say that. They said, let's stick a tax, a payroll tax, on all of our companies in the metropolitan area, including those in Nassau and Suffolk County. And they killed our schools and our companies and our not-for-profits to have to pay this outlandish tax. And now this new MTA board is saying enough of that. Let's get concessions. So here we are. We can seize the day and finally get the concessions and roll these things back. By the way, by way of disclosure, it was my law firm, Campolo, Middleton, and McCormick, that wrote the brief on behalf of our client, William Schoolman, who owns Classic Coach, who said, we're going to attack that MTA tax as being unconstitutional. We actually won on a lower level, and it was reversed in the Court of Appeals. So we're stuck with it. But the lawsuit did have some utility in that it raised so much attention that the state legislature did waive that tax for a lot of small businesses, thank God. But bigger businesses are still being killed with this tax. Well, anyway, Bill Schoolman, who was the plaintiff, had said that if you look at the MTA compared to a private transportation company, the MTA has 58% of its cost attributed to payroll. In a private entity, it might be 35%, most of it going to gasoline and the maintenance and things of that sort. So that's where your discrepancy is. And it's time for that dichotomy to change. And here's a new MTA board saying, we're going to stick to our guns and change it. But what does Newsday do? Newsday does an editorial earlier this week say, enough already. We can't have a strike. give in already. Let's just go to a third party and let them be an arbitrator. And boy, did that send a lifeline to the union. And then you had all of these elected officials say, no, MTA, lay down. Don't fight so much. Go to an independent board and accept their decision. You know what it sounds like to me? It sounds an awful lot like mandatory arbitration. The same horrible system that has now given us detectives who are going to get $227,000 a year on their salaries. Haven't we learned from these mistakes in the past? But no, these guys who can finally say, let's change this system, let's change these work rules, let's let management manage, have told management, lay down, and send it to a federal board, which we know is stacked with liberal lackeys appointed by the president. How do we know that? There was a board that gave an advisory opinion a month or two ago telling the union telling the management to back off and give like 2.5 plus percent increases every year without any workforce concessions. Do you think another federal board is going to be any more stringent than that? Of course not. What a crying shame. What a lost opportunity. Where are the elected officials with backbone to say enough of this nonsense? And then you look at this detective contract. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. $227,000 now for a police officer detective by 2018 when you count in the night differential and the average overtime take. Well, the Malone administration says, this was a wonderful deal. And in fairness to them, arbitration stinks. You go to arbitration, and these arbitrators do give away the store. But sometimes you can get something back, as my administration did when we demanded that the starting salary be lowered from $57,000 for a police officer down to the low 40s. We were successful in that. Or when we got the sheriffs and the correction officers to give up their unused sick days being cashed in upon retirement. No more. We got that taken out. But this deal that was crafted, first for the PBA with the present administration, and now with the detectives, is outright awful. First, they put in a no layoff clause, which means you've lost all of your leverage. But then they backloaded the increases. So they give themselves 0 increases for the first couple of years. Not freezing steps, mind you. The steps still go in, so people are still getting increases. But they backload it so that they say, it'll only be like a 1.5% increase. But that's twice a year. So it's 3.25, 3.5% a year. But then what they don't tell you is they're also throwing in longevity payments for those guys on top step. And then they've given what they call educational benefits for people who don't even have the education. So these were all ways to mask increases that were way beyond 3.5%, but they can say it was only 3.5%. Well, it was way, way more than that. They say, we're going to increase the number of steps that it takes to get to top step. But they don't say that 82% of all of the detectives are already on top step. So you now have a $50 million package for what? 344 detectives. Meanwhile, AIM, the Association of Municipal Employees, the rank and file guys and girls out there fixing potholes, the blue collar guys, their entire contract was about $50 million. So 300 people making the same amount or costing the same amount as 5,500 AIM employees. Now, granted, the AIM contract was shorter than the 8-year deal for the detectives. But even when you even that out, you can see that all of the money, the vast majority of the money within Suffolk County and Nassau, for that matter, are in the police departments. That's where the money is. That's where the changes need to be made. Now, hold on to your hat, folks, because the Budget Review Office also noted that starting, very shortly, you're going to see the SCAT pays, which is the pay for the unused sick and vacation upon termination, really going through the roof. being very common that you'll see a $300,000, $350,000 check going to a detective or a police officer who's been there for many years for just their unused sick and vacation. Now, you guys in the private sector have no idea what this is all about because you don't get that. You use it or you lose it. That's what it is now with the corrections and the sheriffs, which we negotiated. That's what it is for New York City officers. But here, and it's in Nassau County, you get these outlandish salaries and cash outs upon retirement. When is it going to end? Every year, every 2 years, I should say. In Albany, there is a vote to extend mandatory arbitration. And every single one of our assembly members and senators vote for it, except for one brave soul, Mike Fitzpatrick. When is someone going to have the backbone to say enough to this stuff? You know, Mike Fitzpatrick has put in a bill that will change this stuff. He's a minority assemblyman. We need a majority senator and a majority assemblyman. Letters were sent out to every one of those individuals on Long Island and beyond. And you know, not one of them has stood up and said, yes, I will support that bill to finally give taxpayers a break. What a disgrace. What an absolute disgrace. We need more Mike Fitzpatricks out there who have some backbone, some gumption, and who will stick up for taxpayers instead of giving the store away to special interests time and time again. It's an absolute disgrace. Well, one of the things we're seeing now, besides our taxes going through the roof, as our LIPA bills continue to go up in astronomical levels. Again, where's the outrage? I know if Richie Kessel was still the head of LIPA, there would have been front page after front page in Newsday about how the rates are going up. Now, Governor Cuomo had a big press conference a while ago introducing PSE&G, the new replacement for National Grid, and there was going to be a rate freeze. Well, the fine print didn't tell you that that's only for the delivery of your electric bill, not the supply. So if the oil and the gas was going up, that wasn't going to be capped on your bill. You were going to be hit with that hard. And in fact, in January, you had the highest increase just about ever in LIPA, 17% increase. And now we heard that if you were on a balanced billing, one half of all those people on balanced billing are seeing a major increase in their rates. And yet, the governor was able to say, I froze your LIPA bill? Oh, no. I was just talking about the rates, not the supply. Kessel never got away with that. I'd never get away with it as an executive saying, hey, I capped your taxes except for that pension increase that just doubled. So, I have to raise you by 20%. Can't get away with that. Yet they're getting away with it on the electric side. One other interesting thing I want to talk about, and I want to hear from you in our next segment. This is Steve Levy on Speak Out Long Island. I want you to call in at 451-1039. Let's see what you might have to say about this new governor proposal for giving those in prison college education. Now, he says that it's a worthwhile investment because it will break the recidivism, which we know is quite high. And that, in turn, would save a lot of money for taxpayers and make us safer. Well, the Republican minority in the assembly went apoplectic on this. And they put out these ads and these press releases, about here's a student Johnny who I was told work hard, play by the rules. I went, got good grades in high school, and then I worked part-time, and then working on the side as I'm going to college for my degree. And then you see the other guy, Ralph, who's in prison. I robbed someone. I cheated the system, and now I'm getting it for me for free. So it's raising quite a bit of ruckus, where some are saying this is outrageous, that money's being diverted from good students to help those in prison. But then there are others who say, hey, it might just be a worthy investment that winds up saving us a lot of money in the end. I saw two really good letters to the editor from Newsday on this that really encapsulate it all. One is from a fellow, Terrence Kane in Long Beach, and he was very much against it, and his argument was, if you're going to do anything, teach them a trade and not allow them to have liberal arts. But, he's saying basically it's a waste of money. But remember, it's going to cost money to teach them a trade as well. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, a woman, Bonnie Friedman from Central Islip, had a really good idea. She's saying, you know what? If you're going to do this, that's fine. But then have a provision that when that person gets a job out of prison, that they start paying back for that college education that they were given. Very, very fascinating perspectives from our readers who gave suggestions that I don't think our policymakers might have thought of. So I don't think this is necessarily a black and white issue here. It is kind of galling that, a regular college student playing by the rules is out there scraping to get by, and you see someone in prison getting it given to them for nothing. But by the same token, if the governor is right that it does work and it would, in fact, reduce recidivism and reduce the cost of incarcerating a person again and make us safer, is that not something worthy of consideration? Well, maybe they should experiment with it on a short time basis and see how it works, and maybe take the recommendation of these readers into account. Some good ideas come from the public, and that's why we want your ideas in our next segment. 451-1039. We want you back here on Long Island Talk Radio. We're going to be talking in our next segment with Fred Gorman from Long Islanders for Education Reform. We're going to be talking about everything from tax cap to state aid to what teachers' salaries, you name it. Fred's an expert in this area. We're going to want to hear from him, and more importantly, want to hear from you. 451-1039. We'll see you on the next segment. This is Steve Levy. Okay, we're back. This is Steve Levy on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, Part 2. We welcome your calls at 451-1039 on anything that I talked about in my first edition. And we're here joined by Fred Gorman, who is always an interesting guest. He's the founder of LIFER, Long Islanders for Education Reform. He's also a president of the Nesconset Sachem, what is that?
Civic
Association. And you'll love this one, the president of a group called LIPA Lies.
Long Island Energy Surveillance.
Yeah, so that is going to be quite interesting to talk to Fred. Now, just so you know, by way of disclosure, we had Lisa Tyson from the Progressive Coalition scheduled to be with us today as a counterbalance because Fred tends to be more of a taxpayer advocate. And she unfortunately had to cancel. She is with child and had some related matters. She's all good, but she's going to come back on a future show. We thereafter made some calls to some teachers' unions on short notice, and unfortunately they couldn't go. But Dick Iannuzzi, who's the president of the teachers' union statewide, has agreed to come on in a future show. So that'll be wonderful. So, Fred, here we are. We're talking about so many things going on, and you joined our group in the Center for Cost-Effective Government up to Albany to protest a lot of these mandates from the state, one of them being the Tri-Borough Amendment. Can you explain what the Tri-Borough Amendment is and how, in your opinion, it's killing taxpayers and school districts?
Well, what the Tri-Borough Amendment did is it gave the unions no reason to negotiate. They can only negotiate up because they can't lose anything. Nothing can be taken away from them. So the only place for them is up. So when they're sitting in a room and they're going to negotiate, it's going to be for more money. Now, if you also have binding arbitration, that automatically gives them a 2.5% or 3%, depending upon the binding arbitration. So what you have is a union that if I don't do anything, I'm going to not only be able to get a 2.5% to 3% increase, I'm going to get 100% of my benefits. I'm going to get all my step raises, and the money's just going to keep piling in. So why should I settle for less? And that is what is at the heart of all the problems that we are facing in Albany, is this huge cost for municipal employees and their benefits.
Well, this will be the year where maybe it comes to a head in Albany. In the meantime, we have John from Mount Sinai calling in. Welcome to the show, John. John, are you with us?
I am.
John, how are you today?
I am well, yeah. I'm calling in regard about the dire need of property tax reform on Long Island.
Well, you got the right guy here in Fred Gorman, who's been dedicating his life to making Long Island more affordable. What in particular? I mean, give us an example. You're probably a typical homeowner. How have you been hit with the taxes? I mean, are you seeing it impact your family? Or are you on the brink? Are you a retired guy? You're working on, what kind of taxes are you paying? What do you feel is the big problem related to taxes driving them up so much here on the island?
Well, there's really a couple of points here. On my recent tax bill, the two big expenditures, over 60% is being allocated for school districts, and over 11% is being allocated for the police departments, which I think is totally absurd.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting to say that with the PD, because the PD comes under the county. And just to give you an example, John, in my previous segment, I talked about how expensive it is to live here and how high taxes are and where all the money is. It's all the police department. Your general fund tax bill, okay, if you look at your tax bill, county general fund, you're probably paying about $100. If you look at your county police district bill, it's probably over $1,000. So the $1,000 is going just to the police department on your county bill. Everything else in the county is being funded with just $100 from your property tax. Now, there's sales tax in there, too. That helps pay for that. But that's how outrageous it is with those costs. And Fred, John brings up a good point. We can bicker about the town tax and the county tax and all that other stuff. But really, it's the school. That's about 2/3 of your bill. Is that not correct, Fred?
Yes, that's correct. It's usually somewhere between 60 and 70%, depending upon your school district and how much state aid they get.
John, any other thoughts as to what our elected officials could be doing?
Well, just for instance, you touched on the school districts here. I believe in Suffolk County, there's over 70 school districts in Suffolk County. In order to have a tax saving, I just don't understand why some of these school districts can't consolidate, or even if they're not going to consolidate, at least consolidate some of their services in order to help, pay, little taxpayer savings.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we're going to get into that very topic in about 5 minutes, so stay tuned. We're going to talk about that in reference to what the governor's trying to do. So thanks for your call, John. We've got Bob from East Islip chiming in. Bob, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. Thanks so much, Bob. What's on your mind?
Pretty much what I want to vent a little bit about is, I'm an A&E worker, okay?
Right.
And, I don't think that the general public pretty much knows what exactly we bring home, for pay. I mean, I got over 20 years in the county right now, and my pay is, in the mid to high 40s.
That's right. And how long you been working? You've been working for a long time, right?
A long time, and it's great that I have my benefits, but remember this, and I want everybody out there to understand this. When the job industry was good and everything was good and people were driving all their excursions around, they were laughing at me because I was bringing home $48,000 and they were bringing home $148,000. Now it's the opposite, and people are begging for work. You know what? I deserve my benefits that I'm getting.
No, hey, listen, I think that's a fair point.
People are always putting us down at A&E workers or union workers in general are killing us. It's not true.
Well, Bob, I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because if you heard me in the first segment, what I talked about was where the money is going in Suffolk County. It's not to the AIM worker. It's to law enforcement. And if you could put down your radio for a second, it would kick off the reverberation. But it was you look at the detective contract, okay? There's 300 to 400 detectives. Their contract is going to be $50-some-odd million. Now you look at the AIM contract for, over 5,000 employees in AIM, it's about the same amount of money. So, the county taxpayer is funding a contract for 350 people. They're getting the same amount of chunk of change from the county as 5,500 people are. Now, albeit it's for a shorter contract, but even when you factor that in, it's not the guy on the payloader. It's not the office worker that's making us bankrupt in the county. It's mostly these law enforcement payments. And Fred, you say that that's what we're seeing in our schools as well.
There's a reason that you're seeing this with the police, and there's a reason you're seeing it with the school districts. Unfortunately, sir, your union is not as powerful as the police union. You are not going to elect officials. You are not going to tell officials that if they don't give you money, they're not going to stay in power. If you had
they do that, I'll tell you that, but they're not as powerful. You're right.
Not to the same degree.
Because lawmakers don't want to make it look like they're soft on crime. But you're absolutely right, Fred.
It's not just making it look soft on crime. Let me tell you something about the Suffolk County Police Department, for example. Do you realize that with the same number of cops we have is the same number of felonies we have? They're exactly the same. We have roughly 2,700 cops and roughly 2,700 felonies committed in the course of a year. So, when you say law and order, I don't think the Suffolk County Police Office or Police Department is just law and order. They're also your first responders. There's a lot of things that they do. They bring order to chaos. They're there to protect the roads to make sure that they're safe. It's not just crime. So when someone says it's all about crime, I don't think that's the right issue. I think what you have to really look at is the power of those unions and their ability to turn around and get a politician to do whatever they want.
And Bob, you understand as well. You guys in AIM don't have mandatory arbitration. Now, it's really mandatory arbitration that has created that dichotomy in the salaries.
And then we are coming with our new administration, our new Amy administration. We are coming back stronger, and we will come back. And I guarantee you, mark my word, we will come back.
Well, I'm glad you called, Bob, because I'll tell you, the average state worker, the average county worker, you're not going to have a pension that is $100,000 a year. You might have an average pay of $40,000 a year, in that range. It's the guys in law enforcement, and you probably saw Newsday today where the correction officers had this outlandish amount of overtime. And what that means is when they set their pension, if their base is now considered $200,000 in payment when it's really, 75, but they got 125 in overtime, now you're going to get a pension of $125,000 a year. That is not the average worker. It's in a few select unions, and that's where we really need to concentrate to make these changes. Hey, Bob, thanks so much for your opinion.
Can I just say one thing to Bob before he goes? Bob, I just want to tell you something about pensions. You joined a union and a municipal union because you said, wow, I have a guaranteed pension. What you don't realize is if you get laid off before that pension is vested, you have nothing, zero. So if you're a teacher and you're teaching 9.5 years and they all of a sudden decide they don't need you as a reading teacher, you can't get another teaching job, you've lost it all. And that's basically with any municipal union. So you got to take that into account. And then you also should take into account, go to a financial advisor and say, look, this is how much I get myself every single year towards my 401k or pension. Now, if I put that in a 401k rather than in a pension, where would I be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now? You may be shocked at the different result because you're not providing your services for everybody that's in the union. You're looking at your own money for yourself, and it really makes a big difference.
What you're bringing up here, Fred, is the concept of a defined contribution system,
exactly,
as opposed to a defined benefit.
It's much better for the union employee, especially the municipal employee.
And Bob, as you probably know, folks in most people in government have the defined benefit where you vest after 10 years. And by the way, before my administration, vesting was like 1 year. We made it 10, that you had to work 10 to actually vest, which I think is fair. And I didn't really get much pushback from the union on that. But beyond that, you get a guaranteed payment every year, and people say that's worth it. We want that system. The new trend, at least with SUNY employees, the professors in the SUNY system, they have a defined contribution where the employer puts in a little, the employee puts in a little, and then it grows or drops with the market. That's what most people in the private sector have. They have a 401k. The benefit to that is that you can take that with you whether you're working 10, 20 years or just 1 or 2 years. You don't have to vest. So we're pushing for this change because ultimately, Fred, we don't want the taxpayer being on the hook anymore for these $125,000 pensions. That's a guarantee. And if the market goes down, as it did after 9/11, after the stock market crash of 2008, we taxpayers have to make up that difference.
Well, actually, Steve, I certainly defer to your knowledge, but I don't necessarily agree with that. When you're talking about a pension program where you have to make a certain amount of profit every single year, it's entirely different and run entirely different than a system where you're constantly putting your money in and you're looking at it 20, 30, 40 years down the line. As I'm saying, you really need an expert to sit down there and individually look at how much you're putting in and where you should be on what type of investment. And then you'll see individually you do much better than you do collectively.
Well,
That's
I think
all,
we're kind of saying the same thing
Right.
with the defined benefit, which most municipal employees have. They put in a certain percentage of their pay. The government matches it, and then the state controller says that we'll invest this money, but if the investment comes in under 7.5% on the return, taxpayers will make up that difference so that you will be guaranteed, pensioner, of a certain defined benefit. You don't have that in the private sector, and it's that guarantee that has caused so many problems around the state and the nation. And in fact, now in Detroit, we're seeing that after the bankruptcy, many of these folks who thought they were going to have that pension forever are finding that they're not. It's being cut significantly. Some, from 10 to 30% of the pension they thought they were going to get. Hey, Fred, let's shift gears here a little bit.
So long, Bob.
You were at the forefront, your organization, in helping put in place the tax cap. And I remember all the naysayers claiming, you'll never be able to get it done. It's going to create havoc within the schools. Everything will collapse. Well, here we are several years later, and it hasn't happened. What's your thoughts as to how it's worked? And by the way, congratulations for the good work in helping to make that a reality.
Well, roughly, Long Island school districts in general, based on the way that they were increasing prior to the tax cap and the tax cap, island-wide, we're down maybe $500 million in cost, which is very, very significant. And it's still heading in that direction. And, of course, the school districts are crying like stuffed pigs. Oh, my God, what's going on here? You're hurting the kids. You're hurting the kids. But, unfortunately, we're not only not hurting the kids, you have to realize we have less kids to educate. And school districts, like we were talking about before with pensions, when the pension goes up and you have to give a lot of money, you yell and scream and you cut things around. And then when there's more money than you know what to do with, because now the pension is only 1% of the taxing structure, which would never be the case if you had a private 401k. When it gets down there, they're spending your money like drunken sailors. There's nothing that they can't get and they want.
But
and, of course, it all goes to their friends.
The cap helped prioritize.
The cap brought it to an end.
Well, we got Tom from Blue Point who wants to chime in. Welcome to the show, Tom. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Steve?
Great. Thank you so much.
So many questions, I don't know where to begin, but let me give you 4 things off the top of my head.
Okay.
And I'll hang up and listen to what your guest has to say and you have to say. One, you started off talking about Loco. Personally...
Loco, wait a minute. What century in here, Tom? LIPA, we mean, right?
Yes.
Just pulling your leg. Go ahead.
Yeah, dating myself, I guess. From the last bill to this bill, it went up $100.
Wow.
The next thing, you're talking about pensions now, and you're talking about defined contributions. Aren't most politicians in the state on that pension plan?
Yeah, they are, in fact, and I'll let you get to your other 2 points, but I just want to let you know, Mike Fitzpatrick, the fellow who's really spearheading the drive for reform, is actually suggesting that moving forward with incoming electeds, that they be in the contribution plan as well as the other incoming employees. Constitutionally, the state is prohibited from going back on those already in the system and changing them over to a contribution plan as opposed to benefit. But prospectively, you can do it, and Fitzpatrick's bill would include the elected officials.
Well, I can see that would make a lot of sense, but I can see why also politicians weren't very big on trying to change what the retirement system is, since they're a part of it, and then they vote on it, which, again, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But
Yep.
at any rate, the next thing on taxes in general, I think the state somehow now is trying to beat the tax issue by attaching fees to everything. I got a bill for an insurance company, and I just happened to notice on the bottom of it a $10 fee for something about driver safety in New York. Now, the insurance company is based out in the Midwest someplace, but they add a $10 fee for New York drivers or New York people that are insured in New York. I Googled it to try to find out what it was. It started out, I think about 10 years ago, as a $1 fee, and it was supposed to go to the state troopers. They wound up bringing it up to $5, and then most recently made it $10.
And by the way, check out your phone bill, and you'll see a fee for the MTA on that as well. And Nassau County came under a lot of criticism where Ed Mangano was running for re-election saying, I've held the line on your property taxes, but he increased fees dramatically. So good point on all those items, Tom. Hey, thanks for calling in, Tom. I'm going to have Fred comment on the things. Did you have one little quick final tidbit there, Tom? Because I counted 3.
Votes, and it seems that according to the Investors Business Daily, that Eric Holder is now trying to get felons the right to vote in jail. So why do you talk about college in jail? How about voting for felons?
All right, thanks, Tom. You've been a great guest. If others want to call in, it's 451-1039 here on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. Boy, a lot he went through there, Fred, a whole lot. Talked about fees. He talked about his LIPA bill going up by so much money, $100 in the last bill. Again, I remember Newsday every day, another huge front page LIPA bill. This has kind of gone on without, they've had a couple of articles, but not the kind of fanfare you'd think they'd have.
I am so disappointed in our governor. He did a lot of great things, and I expected him to do a lot more great things, but I'm totally disappointed on LIPA because I've spoken to his people and everything else, and I want all your readers to understand something. First of all, 17.5% of your bill is someone else's property taxes. Municipalities shouldn't pay property taxes. Just remember that 17.5%, because we also have another 17.5%, which is perpetual debt. It goes all the way back to Shoreham. They've been constantly borrowing, and that debt has remained. It went from $7 billion. We now have $10 billion. Now, those 2 items are excluded from whatever PS&G is going to do. So all the fixing that they're talking about is going to be increased debt, which you're responsible for.
Well, I'll tell you, Fred, I remember when this governor's father, Mario Cuomo, was pushing for the closure of Shoreham and the creation of public power. We were the ones in the Suffolk legislature who said, you have to have bondholders eat some of this. He said no, gave them a major windfall, and we're still paying for it today. We're at the end of this segment. We have some callers calling in. If you're one of those callers, hang on. We're just taking a quick break. We'll be right back. Call us at 451-1039 on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We'll see you in the second half in just a couple of moments, folks.
If you're looking for political correctness, fitness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
And welcome back, folks, to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is Steve Levy, the former county executive. You're with us live. We want to hear from you today at 631-451-1039. We're in the second half of our program, and we had Fred Gorman from LIFER, Long Island's for Education Reform, in the last segment. He's still with us here in this segment. But, you know, the phones have been lighting up to such a great extent, and we want to continue to recommend that you guys call in and give us your thoughts. Okay, Fred, the first fellow who called, I think it was John from Mount Sinai. He talked about the need for consolidation. There's 70 school districts in Suffolk County alone. I asked him, what do you think we can do to try to save on taxes? And he said, it's about time we do some consolidation. I remember years ago when I was a county legislator, my office was in Sayville. There was talk about combining Bayport and Sayville, two more homogeneous type of districts you can't find, and yet that wasn't able to consolidate. Yet the governor is talking about trying to push consolidation, which I think is a good idea, but he's tying it to this whole concept of his so-called tax cut. So he's saying, I will give money to districts. Number one, in the first year, if they show they stay within the 2% cap, that's fine. But two, in the second year, if they show they're consolidating. So it's not a real tax cut unless these other things happen. Good idea, bad idea? You think this is going to happen?
It's a wonderful idea, and I hope it happens. Because here in Suffolk County, we actually have water districts that don't have water. You want to talk about schools, they say, oh, no, we can't consolidate. Well, just imagine schools and libraries did consolidate. Imagine if we had one library system that covered one end of Suffolk to the other. You could go anywhere you want, get anything you want, go to any program, wherever you wanted to go to a program, and it would all be the same. And at the same time, in particular areas, they could move certain literature. They could move everything around the county. So every library close to you was giving you the best. At the same time, we don't have a Suffolk County School of Science. We don't have a Fashion Design Institute. We have none of those things, and BOCES is not the answer.
Well, BOCES obviously is more trade-oriented. But we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but the phones are lighting up. We have Jake from Quorum. Jake, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Are you with us, Jake?
Hello?
Yes, hi, Jake.
Hi. Hi. I know you guys are doing well because you said so to everyone else. So anyhow, I just want to say I hope you are. But what can be done from people, because I've been living in my house here for over 40 years. No one's been going to school since like 1977, and the taxes, that's what's driving really me crazy.
The school tax.
Yes.
Well, you know, Fred, there has been a call for many, many years. I remember seeing it introduced in the Senate year after year. It would go nowhere. It would say that if your kids are out of school, you're a senior, you don't pay the tax anymore. That never really got any traction. But, I mean, once you hit that senior level, you do become eligible for a lot of tax breaks. But he's not.
House.
Jake's not there, so he's kind of in the middle. What's your thoughts on that, Fred?
It's robbery. All right, you want to know the truth? The entire system is robbery. First of all, if you take a look at the law, the state, not the individual homeowner, is responsible for the education of the children. So why is it brought down on a burden on a personal homeowner in a particular school district? And why do we have individual districts? Why do we have so many individual districts when we also have a state and we have a federal government? Everybody's kicking money in to this system. Why do we need individual school districts?
Well, when you say
we're supposed to go for that too.
Well, you talking about the lottery? Well, yeah. I can tell you with the lottery, because I remember when I was up in Albany, this would come up a lot. I was an assemblyman, and I looked into this myself. It is not false to say that the lottery money goes to education. But the joke of this is that it was sold to us as being a dollar for dollar reduction in our property taxes. Huh? We were sold that If you just let us do the lottery, every dollar we get in is going to reduce your property tax. It didn't. You know what happened, Jake? They just used it as extra money. Oh, look at this windfall we have. So it went into salaries. It went into all this other stuff, and you never really saw it.
Let's buy a desk.
Yeah.
So what
Let's
can we
build
do?
another
What can
building.
we do?
Well, there is a lot we can do. One of them is changing the tri-borough amendment, which would get control over the salaries that and the step increases, which is 70% of a budget. The other is consolidation, which we're going to talk about in the next few moments on the show. But thanks again for calling in, Jake. We got Paul from Lynbrook who's calling in. What's on your mind, Paul?
Hey, Steve.
Hi, Paul. You're on with Steve Levy, Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, and Fred Gorman, our guest. And we got Paul.
Hey,
what's on your mind, Paul?
Hi. I'm just calling because I really think that people who are against the idea that Como proposed for providing some money for education for people in prison, I think they're not seeing the bigger picture here. I think that they're really, really missing the fact that whatever we decide to do in the future to try and help the kids who need help with their college loans, somehow whatever the proposal is going to involve state money. And we'll have more of that to be able to put to that program if we end up using Como's plan for the college education for people in prison.
Well, just to reiterate Paul's point here for those who are joining us late, in the first segment of the show today, I brought up Governor Cuomo's proposal that would spend about $5,000 per inmate to try to get them a college education. And some people thought it's a good idea. Some people thought it was an outrage in that money that goes to the prisoners will be diverted from aid that could go to law-abiding citizens throughout the land. Paul, your point is it's a worthy investment to try to get these people in prison an education so that when they come out, they're not going to fall back into a life of crime. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that ultimately ends up saving money for the state and offering more money for the very things that the critics of this program say the money that would go to this program should be spent on.
All right, well, good point, Paul. A lot of people are mentioning that. What do you think about the suggestion from one of the Long Islanders who wrote into Newsday saying, okay, I can go along with this plan so long as the prisoner who's getting this free education, upon getting a job when they get out, start paying something back into the system to pay back. What do you think of that? Is that fairer?
I think that's pretty fair, providing you don't end up having a situation like with the federal student loan system where the government ends up making a profit off of the students. Mm-hmm. Providing it doesn't turn into something like that, then yeah, I think that's completely fair.
I'm going to make a wager.
Can I ask you a question? Do you honestly think that you can educate someone in the state of New York for $5,000 a year?
Well, wait. Don't we do it? Don't we do it? What's the tuition for Stony Brook? What's the tuition for Suffolk Community College? It's less than that.
I think it's more, isn't it?
No, it's not. No.
For $5,000 a year they're doing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Hey, Stony Brook tuition's about $4,000
for that.
Say that again?
You couldn't do that for Stony Brook. You would be hard pressed to make that work for Stony Brook.
Well, that's
Maybe
a tuition.
For Suffolk, though.
No, the tuition in Stony Brook is not more than $5,000 a year. I mean, maybe when you throw in the books and you throw in if you're living on campus and you have all those other fees. That's right.
Tuition for Stony Brook, I believe, is $3,500 per semester.
Oh, it could be because I know that just a few years ago, the new superintendent, they changed the system where it used to be equal at every campus throughout the state, and it was only in that $4,000 range, but they got special approval to raise it in certain districts, and Stony Brook was one. So I may stand corrected on it to you, Fred and Paul. It may be a little bit more than it was. Suffolk Community, I could tell you, because I was in charge of that for a while. I
think it's terrific.
Tremendous bargain, about $4,000. Yeah.
I think it's terrific that we can go to college for $5,000 or $10,000 a year when it costs us $17,000 to $25,000 to go to kindergarten.
Isn't that a good point? And that's the truth. Thanks so much for your call, Paul. We really appreciate it. And that segues us back to the cost of schools here on Long Island, K through 12, so prohibitively expensive. You're right. What's the average? About $19,000 a pupil. Yet you go to Carolina, you go to a lot of, it's maybe half that. Their kids are graduating, aren't they? And they're graduating similar to what we are.
Yeah, but they don't have the advantage of having their curriculum changed every 2 or 3 years. They don't have the advantage of learning how to count this way and then that way, and now we got sticks and
I think you're being
squares
sarcastic here,
and
right?
circles. Yeah, I am being very sarcastic because the biggest part of our local education outside of the teachers themselves and teaching the teachers is this constant changing of curriculum. It is the misdiagnosis of many diseases where kids are put on drugs just so you can get more money. I can go on and on with all the problems that are wrong with education that bring the costs up, but it really comes down to is everybody wants to stick their fingers into something that once worked and it no longer works because it's just a blur and a ball of scotch tape with staples on one side and clips on the other side. It is no longer what it used to be because the children aren't really given a steady curriculum, a curriculum for 8 years that is supposed to bring them to a level where they can go to college or at least go out in the working world and read a complex manual and understand it. We're not giving them that, and we're spending a fortune. And why? Because the unions dominate what they want, and what they want is they want jobs, they want high-paying salaries, they want all these plans. And then you got every educrat on Long Island and every educrat in this state looking to get his hands into there. Oh, let's change this. You take whole language and you take phonics. Here's the simple truth. 85% of the students in the United States of America are going to do better with phonics. The other 15% are going to do better with whole language. Why do we have to put both of them together? Why can't we have teach one set of kids in the same classroom? I'll tell you what. I can go in a classroom, you give me 30 students, forget the 15, give me 10 that are on whole language, and give me 20 that are on phonics, and I'll get both of them reading at the same level.
Hey, Fred, what's your thought on Common Core, which is such a volatile issue right now? I've seen some people for it, but I really can't find those who are for it other than like some editorial boards and the folks in Albany. And rank and file people are saying they're against it, but I think most of them don't know what they're against. What is your thought on it? Because a lot of people are very confused about what it is.
I'm against the federal government being involved in education, and I'm certainly against putting the minds of our children in the hands of the federal government, and that's what you're doing with Common Core. And I'm going to describe Common Core in its worst variety. You see that red up there? Now, I want you, Steve, to look at that red, and I want you to take orange and blue and convince me that that is really purple. And until you convince me that's really purple, I can't accept any of your answers.
What's your point? Is that what they're trying to get to in Common Core? That's what Common Core is doing, is saying,
listen, you got to come to our conclusion any way that you can.
I've been trying.
But you have to come to our conclusion.
I consider myself a fairly, knowledgeable guy. I went through high school. I went through college. I went through law school. And I'm trying to figure out what the heck Common Core is. And I've been doing research, and I can't get my fingers around it. It's like nailing Jell-O to a wall. It says, well, we're going to teach students more holistically. I like the idea in theory that it's raising standards. I really think we have to raise standards in this country. But when I would ask, well, how is this raising standards? I really can't get an answer. So when people ask me, you're for or against Common Core, I'm first saying, I want to find out what the heck it is first.
Steve, do you like it's for the children?
Oh, that's the standard line for everything. It's always for the children.
And
right?
if you're going to turn around and say, gee, everything sounds terrific, talking points are wonderful. You can have wonderful talking points on both sides of an argument, and anyone standing in the middle will agree with both sides. But you know what? Neither one is correct. The United States government does not belong in the minds of our children, period, end of sentence.
Well, now,
take their federal money and shove it up the federal government.
Well, now you're talking. Now you heard the president say he wants to increase spending another $56 billion in his latest budget, and part of that is going to go for pre-K, and he's mentioned it in his State of the Unions now for the last 2 years, and I think that he wants this to be part of his legacy. But now you talk about a federal mandate and the feds telling us what to do. Now he wants all of us to, and he said, oh, the feds are going to pay for it. Yeah, maybe the first year, then we know we're going to be on the dime for it. And it's a system that I've said many, many times. There's no study. Well, there are some studies on this side. There are a lot of studies on this side. At best, it's inconclusive as to whether it even works. And now billions and billions of dollars in New York. They're talking about $1.5 billion a year just for this program.
Steve, the federal government is going to have every medical and every report card and every record a child is made from 3 years of age until they enter the workforce. You think that that's a good thing?
No, I'm saying the opposite. I think
exactly,
it's a mandate that doesn't
exactly
show that there's any cost benefit, there's any effectiveness attached to it.
Understand, this government, I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, is interested in controlling every single person. It is power at its worst. We are losing our freedom.
Well,
listen, I'm a grown man. If I want to ride my motorcycle without a helmet, can I?
Well, not in New York, you can't. In Florida, you can.
Hey, if I want to turn around and I want to eat 10 hamburgers, can I?
Well, it depends on what city you're in. I think Mayor Bloomberg in California are hot on your trail to try to prevent you. They'll tell you how big your soda can be.
Government is interested in controlling your life for the pure sake and whatever mental satisfaction and pleasure they get.
Well, there
power.
is a nanny state developing that is really ticking a lot of people off. On the other hand, there is something to say about wanting to have higher standards. Now, the question is, what are those higher standards? I don't believe that creating pre-K is a higher standard. They say Common Core is supposed to be a higher standard. I don't know how that's a higher standard either. But I think, when we started this conversation by noting how in New York it's $19,000 per student to educate a kid. You go to these other states, it's half of that, okay? Money is not the answer to everything. They keep on saying, throw more money at it, throw more money at it. There was a time in this country where we were number one. We were educating kids in a fantastic way. We were kicking butt with the rest of the world. We didn't have computers. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have computers. Of course we should. But you didn't need a computer to teach a kid how to add or how to read. You had discipline in your schools. You had tight-knit families. All of that is breaking apart now. And they think the way to solve it is by throwing more money into it. And that's why you have the $19,000 per kid cost in this state. It's a crazy blue state. What do we do to change it, Fred? Is consolidation finally going to happen?
Steve, I can't promise you consolidation is going to happen, but I will tell you within the next 3 to 4 years, Long Islanders for Educational Reform and several other groups are going to convince our legislators to seriously look at not becoming Detroit. As a matter of fact, not becoming upstate. Forget Detroit. Look what happened upstate. Upstate, we have places where they're paying 3 and 4% of their property value in taxes. That's a lot more than what you're paying percentile here on Long Island.
Highest in the nation, in fact, are these upstate districts relative to their property value.
And you can't live up there unless you have a municipal job.
Or you're in a hospital, or your prison, a college. You're absolutely right. Those are the things that are funding.
And what you have to realize is these people also realize that what they need is the courage to stand up to these unions that can dethrone them. And the only way they're going to do that is guys like the fellow on the phone and the other people that are on the phone unite and become more of a political force than the unions. Because right now, the unions rule everybody. They know when to duck under their desks. They know when to come out. You're not even around when they do things. Now, because of computers and because of organizations like mine and what you're doing and several other organizations forming, they're having a lot of trouble.
And by the way, folks, if you want to chime in, this is Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We're talking to Fred Gorman, the head of Long Islanders for Education Reform. We're at 451-1039. We definitely want to hear from you. About 3 minutes left in this segment. Fred, another thing that really ticks me off about the myths of education in New York is this myth perpetrated by a lot of eggheads, media elite, academic elites, and New York City special interests, claiming that the New York City school child is getting the short end of the stick, and Albany is ignoring them, not giving them enough money. So they brought a lawsuit. You told me the name. It's the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. They brought a lawsuit many, many years ago. They actually won this lawsuit. A judge said, yes, it's true. These city kids are being underfunded. And it's been my contention that that's a bunch of baloney. If you look at the percentage of school children from New York City, it is actually less than the percentage of state aid in the whole pie that is going to city schools. The difference is in the city, their property tax is extraordinarily low. And out here, we make up that difference by paying a higher property tax. So if you want more for your kids in New York City, folks in New York City, pay more property tax. Don't necessarily look to people in Long Island to pay a higher income tax, so it goes into Albany and then back to you.
Steve, in New York City, they also have a city income tax, and a lot of that goes towards education.
Even with that, it's less than our property tax. I know that for a fact.
That law says, if you read that law says the state of New York is responsible, constitutionally responsible for the education of its children, not the local school district, not the local homeowner, the state. That's what that law states. Read it, and there's nothing else you can say about it.
To do that,
they're not going to do it.
Right, because that would entail wiping out the property tax, and you have to make it up with something, and it would be taxes that are mostly generated by income. Now, there are a lot of people out there, mostly progressives. I mean, we're going to have Lisa Tyson on here from the Progressive Cause. She loves the idea of an income tax that would generate 100% of the income for our schools. It's not going to happen because you would disrupt so many people within the system that there'd be a revolt.
Steve, the state has looked at this several times. There is many, many reports. They have been down here. I've been to conferences, at least 15 or 20, on this exact same subject, and they all come to the same conclusion. The homeowner can't move. The employee can. So that's what it comes down to in a nutshell. We are a fixed target. We can't sell our homes. We can't go. They can tax us, and that's exactly what that's the state's opinion. I'll be more than glad to email you a whole bunch of stuff where they're saying that.
Well, I'll tell you, it's getting to the point where people are feeling taxed out of their homes, as we've heard from our callers today. But they are very fortunate in that they have a guy like you, Fred Gorman, from Long Islanders for Education Reform, who has been on the forefront in trying to put forth the type of reforms that will allow our Long Islanders to stay here on this island. I want to thank you for joining us this segment, Fred. I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We still have one more segment to go. Come back in a few minutes, 451-1039. Call in.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former County Executive Steve Levy. This is the last segment of our show and our live call-in. We want to have you chime in. We want to hear your thoughts. We've had a very interactive show, a number of callers in the last three segments. If you want to call in, it's 631-451-1039. We talked about everything in those first three segments, from consolidation of schools, the school costs, this Long Island Railroad strike that is potentially heading our way, the detective's contract that's going to give us a $227,000 law enforcement official. So many things. I wanted to get into in this last segment a little bit of local, a little bit of federal stuff. And it's the federal stuff that really caught my attention just yesterday. And I hearkened back to that State of the Union address a while ago from Bill Clinton. Remember that address where he said, "The era of big government is over"? Well, that was replaced yesterday by President Obama saying, "The era of austerity is over." And it really had me kind of scratching my head and laughing at the same time. I said, austerity? What austerity? You're claiming there was austerity? I'm waiting to see this clampdown on entitlements as though there was austerity. I don't know what austerity he could possibly be talking about. I guess he was talking about a reversal of the cutback on the increase to Social Security. That is, every year you'd get a Social Security cost of living increase. The media has falsely noted it to be a cut in Social Security. It's not true. It's just a slowing down of the increase. But even that apparently was too much for our brave officials in Washington to implement. They're already backtracking off of that. And what's amazing to me is that the president is saying, well, I'm doing this because I couldn't get a grand bargain with the Republicans. They wouldn't uphold their side of the deal to allow us for more revenues. I say, excuse me, wait a minute. Wasn't it just right after the 2012 election where you claimed that you had your mandate, Mr. President, that you got the Republicans to cave in and allow for an increase in the upper tax bracket? That was a ton of new revenue that came in to our coffers, and yet there was no give on the Democrat side for any kind of entitlement reform or clamping down. And now you say, well, we don't need it anymore. Don't need it anymore. We've got a $17 trillion debt that's growing by the second. Yes, the deficit, it's come down a little. It's still $700 billion. Higher than, than you can remember. We've tripled the deficit, but now it's only double from where it was, so there's no need for austerity anymore. Come on. Give us a break. Don't you folks in Washington see what's happening in Detroit? Now, in that particular jurisdiction, like with villages and towns and counties and states, you have to balance a budget. There's no balance of budget amendment in the federal government. They just keep printing more money, and they're allowed to carry a deficit from one year to the next. And as was stated in the article, just in yesterday's Newsday, it was the Associated Press article. It noted that this dropping of the so-called austerity was testament to the recently diminished importance of government red ink. It's almost like this passé feeling that, it's really not a big deal. Well, it's not going to be a big deal until it reaches the point that we become Greece, where they're rioting in the streets, or Spain, where 25% of their some of their working classes are unemployed. Don't you wish that someone was listened to in 2007 when they were saying we're in a bubble and it's going to burst, and when it bursts, it's going to cast hell on our economy and our families and our way of life? Don't you wish that those warnings would have been heeded before the fact? Well, now there are a lot of people warning us that this debt explosion is going to be crippling if we don't do something about it. But instead of trying to even take minute measures, as was tried in the past year, they go off that and they go the opposite way, where the president is actually talking about a $56 billion increase in spending on things such as pre-K and the earned income tax credit, which, as you may or may not know, is money that goes back to people who make, in a certain bracket, maybe under $50,000. But do you know 50% of our population already does not pay any income tax? And that's in part due to the earned income tax credit, which is a good thing. But is now really the time that you increase that, where we have no money and we're trying to make ourselves more competitive and trying to shrink this deficit and this debt gap that we have? It's just really, really scary stuff. But what's scarier is there's no leadership at the top which says this is a problem that we have to correct. And by the way, the argument that, we couldn't get a grand bargain, so we're not going to do it, insinuates that somehow that's what you needed to prompt you to do the right thing. A leader does the right thing regardless of what the other side does. The right thing is to get control over this spending, control over a food stamp program that has doubled in cost in 6 years, that has increased the numbers by 50%, the number of people on food stamps, a system that gives out free phones, a system that is collapsing in so many different ways on the disability front. gosh, we need some leadership, someone who will say we have to control this entitlement society because it's going to cripple us. We're not seeing it right now. Shifting to state and local politics. I don't know if you saw this article, two related articles, not directly but indirectly. The governor, it was put in the Long Island Business News that he's changing the rules for a person who owns property, to polluted property, to get it remediated in an expedited fashion so we can get it back on the tax rolls and get some kind of cleanup and remove blight from our communities. This program was doing pretty well. There were changes that went into place a few years ago that made it easier for a person buying a piece of land that they wouldn't be totally on the hook, that it incentivized people to not just look the other way or just totally throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't want anything to do with that property. Because of those old rules, you had a gas station in your community staying vacant for 20 years. So they said, well, let somebody come in and invest in making it better. But that entailed that they wouldn't become bankrupt by doing so. Well, they changed the rules. It was working pretty good. And now Governor Cuomo is saying, we're going to change those rules back. And I think it's from pressure from the environmentalists. And now saying we have to have further applications regarding, all of the paperwork that you have to do. And it's not going to be the same kind of tax write-off that you used to get. Well, basically what they're doing by catering to the environmental lobby here is really hurting the environment, because now no one is going to take over those properties, and they're not even going to have a partial cleanup. They're going to stay polluted to infinity because the government's not going to clean them up, and no private party wants to go there and clean it up. So this is where, again, you get these best of intentions working to actually hurt you. And if you want to chime in on that or anything we've talked about earlier on this program, I want you to call here. Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. I'm Steve Levy, your host, a former county executive. You can call at 631-451-1039. There's a related bill. It's somewhat tangential, somewhat related, introduced by Senator Ken Laval and Assemblyman Bob Sweeney, two powerhouses, both in the majority parties and both very much known for their environmental prowess. But they want to create this Long Island regional authority for water with zoning powers. Basically would be able to supersede local zoning on different items. Now, that gives the impression that there is not presently environmental impact statements that have to be done on projects. There are so many environmental impact projects that have to be done in New York State that it's almost cost prohibitive to do business in this state. Can you imagine another layer that is thrown in on top of this? I mean, you're going through the town, you're going through a village, you're going through the DEC, you're going through the county on many projects where they're close to a town border. When does it end? Could you now imagine yet another level of bureaucrats who will overrule other approvals that you've gotten after 5 years of going through this maze? Wow, that's really scary. What's scarier still, and I don't know if it's the intent within this bill, but I've heard some people here, some leaders on Long Island say, well, you know what we need? We need a combined water authority between Suffolk County and Nassau County. Wow, beware of that. What a mistake that would be. Because here we were in Suffolk County investing over $1 billion in protecting our groundwater by buying up property and keeping it pristine. In Nassau, they did nothing of the sort. So what are we supposed to do now? After spending all that money in Suffolk County, we're going to pipe it over to Nassau County? Wait a minute. Slow down here. We did this investment for Suffolk, and I'm not seeking to be parochial, but it's just a matter of fairness. Now, if you want to try to swap things or you want to try to say, all right, well, maybe Nassau can allow us to hook into some of their sewer districts because they're 100% sewered and we're only 27, 30% sewered, something like that could be worked out. But to create an overall Long Island authority on this that might usurp the powers of Suffolk, I think it's a very, very big mistake. Watch out for that. Now, talking about Suffolk County and talking about the preservation efforts that we've made over the years, I think Suffolk County residents should be quite proud. The Suffolk County legislature and previous executives should be proud in the investments they made to preserve our open spaces. It's not only important for our water supply, but it preserves the rural nature of our beautiful county, which protects the tourism industry, which is one of our largest. It's over $1 billion industry. We have a proposal from legislator Jay Schneiderman, and he hauls this out every year to say that monies from sales tax that come in every year that go into the police department to help defray cost of that behemoth of a tax should be spread out more to the East End towns and the villages because they're not part of the police department. And by the way, if you want to chime in on this, you're listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, and it's 451-1039. Please call in. But the thought from Mr. Schneiderman and others that the East End is getting shortchanged, and we need to give their villages and their police departments, because, again, it's town police departments in East Hampton and Southampton and Southold, Shelter Island, and Riverhead, as opposed to the Suffolk Police Department, which is the 5 western towns. We want to give more money to those East End towns. Well, what you have to factor in is that the sales tax have been raised on every resident throughout Suffolk County over 20-plus years, almost 30 years, to kick in for open space preservation. And that's where most of the money has been going, and most of it has been to the betterment of the East End. Most of these big parcels that are being purchased are on the East End of the island. So their taxes have been kept low on the East End because of the lack of development. Less development means less school children, less roads that have to be built, et cetera, et cetera. And the taxes are definitely lower out there than they are in Smithtown or Huntington or Islip or Babylon, okay? So there's already a benefit that is going to the East End because of the sales tax program. For Schneiderman to turn around and say, well, we want more of that sales tax money, we're going to take it away from the Suffolk County Police Department, is really unfair to the West End of the island. But what blew my mind is a West Ender, Suffolk legislator Dwayne Gregory is the new presiding officer, said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I don't get it at all. I mean, I know he's got a village or two within his district, but it's really at the expense of his other constituents that he's saying that. Bad policy. I fought it. I know current executive Steve Ballone is rightly fighting it. Yes, you can make it equitable, more equitable than it even is right now, and you could say it's equitable at the moment, but not to do what the Schneiderman bill is seeking to do. So beware of that. Now, yet one more thing going on the Suffolk County legislative level. Boy, have you heard about all of this talk about bikes, riding bicycles? And it started with a fellow I think is an outstanding legislator, and he's going to be a guest of mine on an upcoming show, Tom Barraga, who wrote that letter, as you probably know by now, to a school child saying, stay off bicycles in Suffolk County because so many people are going to get hurt. And the writer got offended and it became quite a news story. And I know Tom Barraga, and I know he tells it like it is, and he doesn't pander. I don't agree with him on the particular stance he took, but we now have those on the other side who are saying, oh, we've got to make Suffolk County accessible for bicycles here, there, and everywhere. You got Eric Alexander from Vision Long Island talking about it. And then I say, whoa, wait a minute. Bikes are good. We love bikes. We want to ride our bikes. But then I scratch my head and I drive down Veterans Highway. And I see the money that New York State put in creating a bike lane on Veterans Highway. Now, here's a case where Tom Barraga is right. What the heck are you doing riding a bike on Veterans Highway? You got to be really desperate. I mean, your car broke down and you got to get on there to get from point A to point B. But that is some dangerous stuff. I'm not talking about a side road. I'm not talking about, some of our more innocuous roads. But to think that we're going to take away lane space and we're going to spend money creating bike lanes that will never be used, that's where extremists come in and really start to go overboard. So somewhere in the middle there is the happy median between saying, no, you shouldn't ride bikes at all. Bikes are great exercise. They are clean, but it's not realistic that people are going to start keeping their cars home and start riding their bikes for 10, 20 miles to get to work, especially on some of these more dangerous roads. So be on the lookout for more controversy and discussion with this as we go down the line. Hey, did you read about Donald Trump maybe throwing his hat in the ring to run for governor? Well, it's not as though you heard it here first, folks, but you could take this to the bank. Donald Trump is not running for president. He's not running for governor. And is one particular reason for that. Because it would require him to disclose his finances. And many of us don't think that that is ever going to happen. But give him credit. The guy is a master showman. He knows how to get publicity, especially as a show The Apprentice is about to come on. By the way, I love that show. It's a guilty pleasure. My wife makes fun of me all the time. Sunday nights, I got to watch Celebrity Apprentice. But the fellow who's starting to tick off is Rob Astorino, who is the Republican county executive in Westchester. It was a pretty good record in a Democratic county of trying to keep control over spending and taxes there. And he's on the upswing in his career. But regardless, it is going to be very, very difficult for Astorino to knock off a Governor Cuomo, with a 62% approval rating in a blue state. But it is not impossible. Remember, Cuomo's ratings fell precipitously from the 70s down into the low 50s after he made some faux pas, especially alienating upstate voters. So it's never, ever a lock. And if Bill Clinton didn't throw his hat in the ring, way back when in 1991, when George Bush 41 was at 91% approval rating after the Gulf War, and no one else wanted to get into the race, Bill Clinton would not be president right now, because we know what happened after the euphoria of the Gulf War wore off and the recession kicked in. George Bush, who seemed out of touch, lost that race. It can happen. And Rob Astorino is taking a chance that maybe lightning can strike in 2014 election for governor. We shall see. But keep your eyes peeled on that one. But Rob Astorino should not be worrying. Donald Trump is not going to be running for governor this year. So that's our recap, folks. We had a great session this time around. We talked about everything from school consolidation to Obama's sudden lack of austerity that he says he's now engaging in, to monies for our East End, to brownfield remediation. We're going to talk about those type of topics again next week here on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is your radio show. We want to hear from you. We'll see you and hear from you next week.